This lecture is about connecting ideas, and it finishes with a bit more on complex verb groups. Logical meaning. Logical meaning involves the way we link our clauses together and how we link bigger segments or phases of a text. Logical meaning goes in field. Field concerns the subject matter, what's happening, and how we express ideas, and logical meaning. I didn't tell you that before, but logical meaning is still part of field. Sentences. In order to work out what a sentence is, we need to know how ideas in clauses can be linked, because that's what defines a sentence. Now remember, clauses and sentences are different. A sentence can have 1 clause, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 clauses. Let's have a look at this text. This text overall has 4 sentences and 6 clauses. Sally is a mining engineer. It's 1 clause, 1 sentence, and we'll find out that's a simple sentence. She works at an iron ore mine in Western Australia. That's 1 clause and 1 sentence, also a simple sentence. The next one, she takes rock samples from various sites and tests them in a laboratory. There's 2 clauses there in that sentence, and that's a compound sentence. The job is challenging, but Sally enjoys working in the great outdoors. Again, 2 clauses, 1 sentence, and a compound sentence. What's a clause again? A clause contains a verb. It's a unit of meaning or a message. What's a sentence? It's not a grammatical structure. A sentence can have many clauses, and some people would even say you could have a sentence fragment with no verb in it at all. So please keep in your mind that sentence is totally different from clause. We usually talk about 3 types of sentences: simple, compound, and complex. A simple sentence has 1 verb and it's 1 clause. A compound sentence has 2 verbs, 2 clauses. But the way it's connected, the way the 2 clauses are connected is through a conjunction, a special type of conjunction I'll tell you about. A complex sentence has 2 or more clauses, and it's connected through a different type of conjunction, which I'll tell you about soon. Simple sentences are not simplistic. They are 1 clause, but they can be long. Don't think simple just means easy. Let's have a look at this example. Yesterday I went to my tired, boring old school with dull red walls and multiple dejected basketball courts and drooping rubbish bins. That big long sentence with all its complex imagery is still called a simple sentence because it's got 1 process, went. Here are more simple sentences. Sally is the cleverest mining engineer in Australia. Or Sally is a very clever mining engineer who lives next door to me. Did you notice that embedded clause there? Who lives next door to me is a relative clause describing mining engineer or engineer and telling us what kind of engineer Sally is, one who lives next door to me. Both of those are simple sentences. Those bits in red answer that probe question, what? Remember the participant probe question, who or what? You could say Sally is what? The cleverest mining engineer in Australia. Sally is what? A very clever mining engineer who lives next door to me. So You can have complex noun groups even in a simple sentence. You can have an embedded clause in a noun group, not just at the end. See that third example? The girl who lives next door to me is a very clever mining engineer. This is still a simple sentence. Even though there's more than one verb, that's why we had to tell you about embedded clauses in the last lecture. Now let's look at compound sentences. Compound sentences do contain two clauses and they're connected by a coordinating conjunction. So coordinating conjunction, that's a special technical term you do need to know. There are four main coordinating conjunctions. So if you just learn these, it's pretty easy because then anything else is not a coordinating conjunction. And, or, but, so. There is also nor, neither and yet, but we hardly ever use those in language, mostly in schooling. So anyway, so just stick to and, or, but, so. If you see two clauses connected by and, or, but, so, then that means it's a compound sentence. And here's an example. Yesterday I went to school and I saw my friends. So there are your coordinating conjunctions, and, or, but, so, neither nor yet. Mostly I just mention and, or, but, so because they're the ones we use all the time. Here are some compound sentences. She works and she studies. See that conjunction and. In number 2, there is no coordinating conjunction. So if you've got like a list with 3 equal clauses, that's also called a compound sentence. She works, comma, she sleeps, comma, she studies, full stop. Number 3, she works but she doesn't study. Another compound sentence. She studies so she can get a job. You can find her at work or you can try her at home. She works hard but she plays hard too. All compound sentences. Here's another example. She works and she studies. What could you put in that second example? She works, she doesn't study. Maybe so, maybe and, maybe but. If that's the case, they're all compound sentences. What about the second last one? You can find her at work, you could try her at home, you could try and, you've got or. Either of those would be coordinating conjunctions that help to link two independent clauses, and that creates a compound sentence. Now you try. Here is a very popular book in early years, in about year 1 and year 2. Here are some sentences. I want you to have a look at this and work out, are they simple or compound? Here are the answers. Did you get that? Zach Powell was walking home from school. I've put the verbs in green. Number 1, simple. Number 2, compound, because it was raining and he was getting wet. It's linked by and, which is a coordinating conjunction. He was grumpy. Simple. Both his mum and dad were on spy missions, so he was home alone. Compound. Zach's parents were spies. Simple. Everyone in Zach's family was a spy, and so was he. Compound. Very important point, not all conjunctions link clauses. If you say, I'm eating fish and chips doesn't mean fish is a clause and chips is a clause. Conjunctions can also just link nouns. Have a look at this. Both his mum and dad. The job this is doing is just linking two participants together, so it's not doesn't mean it's a compound sentence. That mum is a compound sentence and dad is a compound sentence. So just be careful. Finally, complex sentences. Again, we have two or more clauses, and they can be linked by a subordinating conjunction. Now, that's any type of conjunction that's not and, or, but, so, neither, nor, yet. So there's because up there. That's not in that list, is it? And, or, but, so, neither, nor, yet. We've got because. So that means that this is a complex sentence. Yesterday I went to school because it was Monday. There's a verb on both sides, either side of that because, and that means it's complex. There are loads of subordinating conjunctions. Here are some main ones: because, since, as, before, although. Here are some more: whenever, until, as, by, in order to, although, whereas, despite. There are dozens. So that's why I find it easier just to memorise the coordinating conjunctions, and then everything else is subordinating. This table is in your grammar and meaning book. Let's look at some examples. She works, she studies. If we say she works after she studies, that becomes a complex sentence, because after is a subordinating conjunction. She managed to finish working hard. By working hard, if we put by in there, by is a subordinating conjunction. What about the gap? She studies, she wants a good job. If we put because in there, because is a subordinating conjunction, therefore it is a complex sentence. You can find her at work if you want her. She works hard although she doesn't really have to. All of these are complex sentences. And I've got two clauses here, but you can have 3 or more clauses. They don't have to just be 2-clause sentences. Now, here's your job. Find out if these are compound sentences or complex sentences. Okay, let's have a look. The first one is a compound sentence because we've got a but in there. But is a coordinating conjunction, so it's compound. Number 2, if is the conjunction, that's subordinating, so it means it's a complex sentence. Number 3, and, the conjunction's and, so it's compound. Number 4, the comet exploded when Zach fired his lasers. That means it's complex. Complex sentences don't need a conjunction all the time. They may have one at the, instead of being in the middle, they might have it at the beginning, like after having breakfast, I went to school. Also, it might have a thing called a non-finite verb. See that word having there on its own? I'm going to tell you about non-finite verbs a little later in this presentation. So a complex sentence can have a conjunction. It doesn't have to be in the middle. It can be at the beginning or it can be in a different order, and it doesn't actually even need a conjunction. Briefly, text connectives. They're different from conjunctions because they connect ideas in a text. Things like however, therefore, nevertheless, firstly, secondly, thirdly. They are not conjunctions. They're not linking clauses. They're linking ideas. They're kind of outside the text in a way. Outside the ideas, I mean, and they're sort of what we do to organise a text. We can contrast ideas, we can add ideas, we can elaborate by giving examples, we can enhance with time, place, cause and manner. All of these things are where the logical meanings come in. Have a look at this little text. I know it's a little bit small to read. This is about bilingualism. We can see already that it's an argument genre and it's an exposition because it's giving one side, one point of view. Have a look at the conjunctions there. Not the conjunctions, the text connectives. What am I saying? In other words, firstly, secondly, finally, and then at the end, in addition. Those text connectives are helping to organise the stages or phases of that text. And there's a big list of those in Grammar and Meaning, so you can see how they work. Here's an example of the table. And you know what? I use this table all the time in my own writing so that I know what to do, and so that I make sure that I use a variety of text connectives, not just one or two. Briefly, I've got to tell you a few more things about verbal groups so that you know that there is lots more to learn about field, even though we're just touching the surface really in this unit. I mentioned before that a complex sentence can have a non-finite verbal group in it. Let's see what that means. A finite verbal group means that we know the tense and that's what the subject of the verb is. So let's have a look at this clause. My sister studied chemical engineering. Studied is the verb. We know the tense, studied, it's past. And we know who studied, my sister. Let's have a look at some other examples. Non-finite verbal groups can't stand alone. They don't have a tense, and we don't know who the subject is. And the best way to remember about non-finite verbal groups is that there are three kinds. ing verbs on its own, ed or en verbs on their own, or to verb, to do something, on its own. I'll show you. Studying chemical engineering. We don't know the tense and we don't know who's doing it. That's a non-finite verb. To study chemical engineering. To study, we don't know when it's going to happen and we don't know who's doing the studying. Non-finite. En or ed, given the circumstances or studied at university. We don't know who did them and we don't know when it happened. So they are non-finite, and if you see these, they're fragments. They can't stand alone as a sentence. If you see them in a sentence, it could be a complex sentence, but if they're on their own, it's a fragment and it can't stand alone. And so here's my other little reminder slide. Non-finite verbal groups, ing, ed or en endings, or to something on its own. Here's a little test for you. Tell me if the verbal group highlighted in black there is finite or non-finite. In Australia, the demands of secondary schooling are very different to those of primary school. Do we know the tense and do we know the subject? If the answer is yes, it's finite. And that is finite. Travelling between different classes with different teachers. Travelling is one of those ing verbs. On its own, it's non-finite. If we said, we are travelling between different classes, then it'd be different. Are travelling is okay, that's a finite verb, but just that travelling on its own, it's non-finite. Just those two little examples will do from this, but feel free to do the rest of them if you want to. Another couple of quick issues. In English, especially in speaking, we use a lot of things called phrasal verbs. They are verbs that end with a short word that change the meaning. For example, swept and swept away. Look and look out. Just so you know, both those words, look out, both those words, swept away, are phrasal verbs. And the other thing to talk about is passive verbs. Passive verbs is when we don't know who the subject is. Let's have a look at this clause. The students donated the books. Donated is a finite verb, and we know who did it. The doer is the students. The students donated what? The books. So the roles are really important. The doer and the done to are both clear. Participant roles. Remember you did some things on participant roles earlier. If we change the sentence around and say the books were donated, we still have the books. That's the done to, but we don't know who did the donating. We could say by the students if we wanted to, but the position gets reversed. The books were donated by the students. We need to add that auxiliary verb were, and the donated stays the same. So this is a very useful way of teaching passive verb structures, especially if you're teaching non-English background language learners. And frankly, if you want to teach a lot of technical language, because we use passives a lot when we're writing information reports and talking about scientific language. Last thing, a lot of verbal groups have many, many words. Have a look at this one. Might have been going to go.